You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is Ilaria Maselli, Senior Economist at the Conference Board, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Insights podcast, a series brought to you by the Conference Board. The starting point of this conversation are the most recent European labour market statistics. With 163 million employed workers, employment in the euro area has reached record high levels in Q2 of this year, while unemployment is at a record low at 6.6%. Despite elevated uncertainty and a looming recession fear, employment in Europe beat expectations in the first half of 2022. Although hiring expectations are on a downward trend since March across all industries, the labour market is currently incredibly tight. I'm sitting down with my colleague Marion Devine, Associate Director for Insights on Human Capital, and Bettina Schaller, Senior Vice President Public Affairs for Adecco and President of the World Employment Confederation, to discuss the insights from our new edition of the European Labour Market Outlook that we publish on October 4. Marion, Bettina, how are you today?
I think we're both waiting for the other one to say fantastic. So I'll start. This is Bettina. Thank you so much, Ilaria, for having me, for sure. I am well. It is a Tuesday in the end of September. And after a busy summer, things are getting even busier. So I would say lucky us. The overall labor market situation is such that I can only say I am very well and very excited with what's ahead.
Right. Let's keep some for later. Marion, all good on your side?
Yeah, all good on my side. Thank you, Ilaria. I'm here. I work for TCB Europe, but I'm also based in the UK and, interesting times in the UK and looking forward actually to better times in 2023. So very interesting times.
The hope principle.
So let's get started. I hear in my conversations with companies the R word everywhere. We at the Conference Board forecast a short and shallow recession between the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023 in the US and in the euro area. My colleagues came up with this idea of a job-full recession in the US, and I think this definition will apply also to the euro area as well. Bettina, would you agree with that?
Well, Ilaria, first of all, there was a time where the R word would have been something like rock and roll or so. So I'm really, what can I say? But indeed, recession is the big word out there, isn't it? And when it comes to what this is doing to the labor markets and the job markets, it's indeed fascinating. That's why I really, really love the term of job full. Because indeed, while we've seen crisis definitely looming everywhere, and while we've seen this or are getting an insight into the economic situation and development, well, on the job markets, things are actually doing incredibly well, right? I mean, in most countries, the job markets are booming. So job full is a great term. I mean, there's thousands of vacancies. Actually, if you look across the entire of Europe, you can even say millions of vacancies. But as we know, at the same time, there's the shortage of workers. And I think that is not going to stop for quite a while. Why? Because with this recession, this time round, we have something we haven't said before or haven't seen before. One, companies are all in full transformation. They have to reinvent themselves. And that is, of course, due to the fact that, digital has hit everyone. Green or sustainability or anything around the greening of the economy has hit everyone. And then, of course, is COVID and those behaviors. So from that perspective, what is happening on the job markets is not going to go away just because there is a recession. In other words, there is a need for people that can feed into those transformations. And now if I look at the data that we have at World Employment Confederation, which brings together all private employment service providers around the world, we see that hiring has been up till pretty much now, everywhere, definitely in Europe. So the slowdown in hiring it has only started now, very, very recently. And again, that is due to the fear out there and definitely not the needs that employers may have.
Marion, do you also think that the next recession will not generate as much unemployment as other recessions in the past?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I think that the phrase "jobful recession" is a really good phrase, and I think that we've seen now a number of recessions, and they have all been different, and there have been different lessons to learn from them. And so sometimes it is worth looking back to look forward. But I think that one of the really important lessons of past recessions is that if you cut into your muscle, if you cut your workers, you will not be in a good position for recovery. Recessions are, by their very nature, incredibly uncertain. So there are always opportunities and there are always challenges, and you never quite know when growth will come and where it will come. And I think that employers have learnt that they have to absolutely keep hold of their really vital workers, skilled, in all levels and all parts of the organisation. As Bettina says, labour markets are incredibly tight. If you let go of skilled workers, you are going to find it very hard to get them back in place. And there would be a real danger that you as an organisation would not be poised, ready for growth. So I think a jobful recession is a really, really good point. Whether or not, though, that there'll be a slight shift in terms of, the growth of the gig economy, that companies will sort of look towards more flexible ways of using, labor and employing people, that might be a case. But I certainly think that, jobs will be, we won't see a massive downsizing of workforces in this current recession or pending recession.
Let's hope we're right. Let me switch to another topic, which is mental well-being. I think what we saw in the recovery that came after the pandemic shock, both the incredible economic and employment recovery, is that this came with a lot of stress. And since the start of the pandemic, workers increasingly expect their employers to support and contribute to their mental well-being. Bettina, can you give us some examples of programs that have been put in place by companies to improve mental well-being of workers?
Well, Ilaria, let me actually pick up on something that Marion just said about the gig workers, because there's one thing your question refers to what workers expect employers to do, right, to support in the mental well-being topic. Now, I really want to make a point around the fact that already now and going forward, not everybody will be in an employment relationship. So this expectation that automatically somebody has an employer, to look at those safety or safe and healthness and mental well-being issues is flawed. Now, of course, if we go from the premise that, something needs to be done because, notably COVID has brought so much attention on that topic and notably on working conditions and working time, what I'm very happy to share is the following. I mean, first of all, and I'm a regulatory affairs, so a government affairs person, so I cannot resist to also mention that for the first time, the International Labour Organization this summer, the ILO, has actually come up with a fundamental principle and right at work being safe and healthy working environment. So it might be surprising, and I just again here want to clarify that the ILO, of course, in its history of over 100 years, has adopted more than 40 standards specifically dealing with safety and health, and has about 40 codes of practice. But again, the safe and healthy working environment is since this summer a fundamental principle and right at work. So this indicates the absolute shift in how this topic is being approached. And of course, to me, mental well-being goes right into that. So now if we go into the role of employers, maybe if I may here just also zoom in on a certain type of employers and a certain type of workers, which for the benefit of our conversation here, let's just say that those are the white collar ones, that very likely can work in a remote work kind of environment. And there, of course, I can confirm the following. We've run a research this year again at the Adecco group. It will be published just next week, so I can't divulge it all. It will be the Global Workforce of the Future research, which covers 30,000 workers. And what we see there, believe it or not, 4 of 10 have suffered a burnout or of overwork over the past year. 4 out of 10. I mean, that number is humongous. 34% are women, saying that their mental health has worsened. And the last number I have for you is that 54% of young people say that they have experienced a burnout. So clearly it is out there, and we know it, that topic of mental well-being needs to be addressed. Now again, employers, so those who have people working for them, as we're seeing, are reacting, right? I mean, bigger size employers, obviously, they've been putting programs in place. They've been looking at a whole array of programs, addressing either working time. They've been looking at programs that build on the purpose, so on the why. People are at work and are employed, hoping, and actually, I think those are important, that, this will trigger a different relationship with work, because this is also what it's about these days, right? Then we see, obviously, a lot depends on culture at a company. That's why actually there's no one size fits all. We've seen a big amount of businesses and employers that have just ramped up communication around the topic. So just acknowledging that there are mental well-being issues is a big thing for many people. And then there's been big adjustments in terms of leadership activities as well. So let me wrap my answer on this one up by just saying that indeed this is here. It's here to stay. And we're only at the beginning of a whole set of activities that employers specifically need to take to ensure that their people, in that case, the ones who are working remotely, can actually cope with what is expected from them, also in terms of their productivity, of course.
Very comprehensive answer. Thank you, Bettina. Marion, you always see a lot of different companies, so I wonder, do you think these programs are working so far?
Yeah, Ilaria, we've done a lot of work in mental well-being at the Conference Board, and we were actually doing this before COVID struck, so it was something that was on our radar very much. As Bettina says, I think that there have been some really fundamental shifts in workers' expectations, that their employers will take seriously their mental well-being. And I think that actually the collective experience of COVID has it's shone a spotlight on mental health. And it's also, I really do think genuinely there is a spread of empathy, real empathy, and even, particularly, I think, among leaders who perhaps before the experience of lockdowns, etc., mental well-being was a bit low on their priority list, maybe. But I think it's important for the work that we've been doing that, mental well-being it's not mental health as such. Companies are not being asked to be clinicians. They're not being asked to take responsibility on for the treatment of mental ill health. Mental well-being is about creating an environment where people can thrive regardless of their mental health challenges. It's about creating healthy workplaces and supportive cultures, and therefore it is very much very much in the power of companies to change practices, to change the climate, to change the culture. And I think this is where companies that have started on this journey, they really succeed once they put in a raft of kind of very practical measures with an employee assistance program and do those very sensible things like signposting and communicating it and putting in training and, really good provision. But there's also a whole sort of part that takes time and effort, changing the culture, creating more openness about mental health, more understanding of what is mental well-being, encouraging people to speak about it, to disclose it, to encourage line managers and supervisors and team leaders to make it a more normal part of the conversation, and to equip people as well to know what to do if they see a direct report or a colleague struggling. So schemes like mental health first aiders are very, very successful, But I think it's the whole thing about changing the culture. And we know that leaders have a massive impact there, that if they are genuinely and sort of authentically talking about mental well-being, showing that it's important, maybe sharing their own life, this is really, really important. And the final point to make really is that I think those companies that are well along this journey are starting to understand as well that mental well-being is very individual, that you need to have an understanding of what that means for different communities, different groups within the organization, and just realizing that you have to tailor some of your benefits and tailor some of your approaches and just have a bit more of a dialogue about what well-being means to different people. So there's this whole sort of intersectionality of identity, that it's not a one size fits all approach. So, but I think there've been some really, really encouraging movements, and that companies are really trying to open up this whole area and break down stigma.
Thank you, Marion. So we talked about the risk of recession and mental well-being, and now we're going to take a very short break for some announcements and be back in a minute to continue this conversation with Bettina Schaller and Marion Devine on the outlook for the European labour market.
Looking for additional business insights in this subject area and beyond this podcast, go to tcb.org and explore our Human Capital Centre. Uncover a large array of products hosted by the Conference Board in focus areas like diversity and inclusion, talent management, and many others. Products include peer-to-peer networking events, expert briefings, publications, data and analysis, webcasts, videos, and blogs.
So we're back, and inflation reached 9.1% in August in the euro area, and I think a new major challenge is emerging for employers, and that is the need to address the financial well-being of workers. An increasing number of households struggle to meet basic needs, and more families are reporting arrears in bills, insurance payments, and loans. Bettina, I have a very simple question for you. Why aren't wages not increasing fast enough to compensate for higher inflation?
Yes, Ilaria, very simple. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So let me give you a simple answer, or at least attempt to do so. Listen, my answer is it's politics and it's the system. But maybe let me just elaborate on that one. Look, I mean, historically, there's always been a lag between inflation and then how the wages would react to that. There's only two countries, and we saw it this time around again, where there are more immediate reactions and, I think we can say adjustments. One is the United States, and the other one is the UK. Now, if we look at Europe, there's one element we need to consider, which is the culture of collective bargaining, or the culture of negotiation, the culture of having everything discussed at negotiation tables. And so the same has applied for many years on wages. So, it just takes the time, and that's where it's the system. It takes the time that it needs to put in place those wage negotiations. Now, they have been set in most European countries. The time now is the time when these negotiations are being kicked off. And depending on where you lived, you will have for sure seen that employers and union representatives have, over the late summer, started to give indications around their expectations. By the way, there's of course one country where wage inflation in Europe is linked to inflation, and that is Belgium.
Where I live.
That is where you live. And there the predictions are that there will be a 10% increase, I believe, for 2023. It's not set yet, but I understand that this is what is being put on the table. But again, most other countries around Europe, that hasn't started yet. It's going to happen. So we will see some adjustments there. One space where we have seen adjustments is certain governments have announced increases, notably in the minimum wages space. So that is something that we've seen. Maybe two more comments I'd like to make on this topic. One is that, of course, a lot of the wage situation is also linked to the rise in energy prices, for instance. Now, I understand and I see that for many households, this is a particularly burdensome expense piece. Now, in a way, and this might cause some turmoil, but the solution here is actually in lowering those energy bills, right? I think that would definitely help on that one. So that's of course a slightly different approach. And so finally, I think we just have to be realistic. Probably again, in many cases there might actually not be a possibility of wage increases that really will take into consideration all the other increases. There will be, of course, discussions around projections around inflation. There is a hope that it will go down. We've seen the interventions by national banks in certain countries to make that happen. So to come back to those negotiations and to what actually composes a package, if I may say so, I think it's going to be important also to look at the broader remuneration piece. So, are there other benefits that one can look at that will, in the long run, also help lighten the burden, but might not necessarily be the wage per se.
So other than in Belgium, where the adjustment is more or less automatic at the beginning of the year, the autumn trade union employers negotiation will play a big role in deciding how much wages will adjust to the inflation that we see now.
It will.
Marion, I have a question for you. Have you seen other solutions that companies are putting in place these days?
Yes, Ilaria. I think that, something that we've seen with the whole area of employee well-being or worker well-being is that companies have a holistic model. Financial well-being is part of that holistic model. I would say until recently that's been less of a concern with companies, and actually mental well-being, emotional well-being really being right up there. Financial well-being now is absolutely, center stage. And I think that large employers are very aware that their workforce is potentially feeling worried and stressed by all this economic uncertainty and the soaring cost of living. It's really important because it contributes towards stress, potentially sick leave, productivity. So again, there are real ethical and business solid reasons why companies should think about financial well-being. And financial well-being, just to define it, is a state where workers feel more in control of their finances and more confident of their ability to plan for their current and future needs. So that's the definition that companies are going with. So, and in that sense, therefore, it's working with their employees to help them, take control and to build some very practical skills in planning. So some of the things that I think that, the sort of critical success factors are absolutely, first of all, listening, really, really trying to have that openness and that frank conversation with different groups of employees who may be struggling with different challenges. So just really sort of realizing that you have to listen and then think about, again, slightly tailored offerings. There are very practical benefits that employers can offer to help with the cost of living. There are discount schemes, ways to provide non-cash help with things like, discount in stores, home computers, travel. And I think companies can be quite, within the restraints of tax, etc. I think they can really be quite tailored and thoughtful. So salary sacrifice schemes, etc. But there's all sorts of very good stuff that companies are doing just in terms of trying to break down stigma and help employees develop their financial planning skills. So financial education, especially on-demand learning linked to very specific financial decisions, all stages of life, and not being patronizing, but also just trying to put in some really practical ways to help people. And some companies as well go even further, and they, in their financial wellness programs, they actually provide financial coaching or they bring in someone external, independent, to hold sort of financial planning sessions with employees. I think one particularly good thing that established, again, before COVID and before this current sort of cost of living problem, was mid-career planning, to help people sit down with a financial advisor and think about the next stage of their life, and some big decisions that they might want to make, including the run up to retirement. So I think there's lots that companies can do to help financial well-being.
And on that topic, I have to say, I have the feeling that there is a lot companies can do, but only a small percentage of workers in the labor market can benefit from employer support, either on mental well-being or financial well-being. And a lot of workers are excluded from this sort of benefits. And so my fear is that fast we will see some sort of social tension increasing in European countries. And I wanted to ask you, Mario, what you think about this. But I realize that you live in the UK, where actually a lot of strikes have started at the beginning of September. So if you can tell about what you see there, and if you expect social tensions to rise further or to emerge in other countries. And Bettina, if you want to comment on that as well, you're more than welcome. Marion first.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose this is going from what are companies specifically doing and large employers with whom we, are strongly connected, versus sort of the macro union movement and sort of activism that's going on. If the UK is any marker of what might be ahead, we are certainly seeing a huge increase in turbulence and industrial action. And as you said, Ilaria, we're seeing it in the railways, we're seeing it in the courts with lawyers, we're seeing it with dock workers, the postal service. So it really is across the board, and it is very, very concerning. So I think that we are seeing a rise in industrial action. We're starting to see unions talking about sort of collective action across industries, and it does feel a little bit like, we've seen this before, and it's worrying. I think though that from employers' point of views, I think it's a case of really listening to workers and really activating, works councils, trade unions, trying to get into constructive discussion. But yes, I feel that if this recession goes on for a lengthy amount of time, if the cost of living continues to be really problematic, if energy costs continue to soar and governments aren't being sort of proactive, I think it's very difficult to see how we won't see more industrial action across mainland Europe as well.
Bettina, do you expect what we see in the UK to extend to other countries?
Listen, I do expect the tension piece to be there, absolutely. And I mean, in a way, the pressure is already here today, because the prices are going up now. We've seen businesses who had, and again, their energy bill not doubled or tripled, but go up 10 times. So, they cannot produce anymore. And that's bakers, that's manufacturers, etc. And there, of course, there's big challenges. If then on top of that you've got the wage discussion as well. So what we expect are just these massive shifts in the labor market continuing to increase. It's going to be very problematic for certain sectors to stay and to remain attractive. And there's going to be a lot of thinking around, again, the why, the purpose. Why should I stay with an employer or an industry that doesn't allow me to pay my bills? I am going to look elsewhere. So that will happen. And here, I have to say it. I mean, you've invited me, and I'm delighted. I represent an industry with, again, the private employment services industry that sits right in the middle of that, that is able to welcome all of these workers and to provide them with contracts that are competitive, with wages that reflect the current situation, and also with ways of working that reflect the needs of flexibility. So from that perspective, I'd really like to highlight how, working for or through an agency, for example, could be an absolutely wonderful way of stepping into the future.
Now, let me shift topic again, and let me remind everyone that because we go from crisis to crisis lately, I think we tend to forget a powerful driver for change in labor market, which is demographics. So we looked at the data for our report, and we observed that compared to a decade ago, the euro area labor market counts more active workers, on average older, and with a relatively stronger female presence. And in parallel, we observe another trend, and that's the fact that the number of hours worked per worker are declining. So, Marion, let me ask you a question. Are these two phenomena related to each other?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite a complex relationship in a way. So I think that we've seen coming out of COVID, there's a massive increase in workers wanting something different from their work and work-life balance. And so the demand for flexible working has really increased enormously. So we know that. We know also that some of the people who, as you say, are increased sort of participation in the labour force are also those who favour flexibility, and women would be that group. Although I think we have to be really careful about stereotypes. And older workers as well tend to work more flexibly, tend to work shorter hours. And by older, I do mean kind of sort of more or less retirement age, those who are continuing to work, and that number is increasing. So I think there is real sort of demand. I think there's also demand from companies. I think companies are starting to appreciate, certainly that's come up in our C-suite challenge, where we annually survey CEOs and C-suite executives around the world. And we've seen a real appreciation of flexibility for their own, strategies, and being able to respond to complex markets and, business cycles, etc. But I think that we also need to just be careful that I think some of the decline in working hours could also be somewhat negative, that we might have groups of workers who are not being able to access the full-time work that they want or the hours that they want. So I think it's sort of worthy of looking into. And I think that the message overall is that we need, in a way, I sort of call it, we need to reinvent flexible working to make sure that in very different circumstances, that it is something that is serving the needs of businesses, but it's also serving the needs of workers. It's being done in a thoughtful way, and those who work flexibly are not missing out on career opportunities or training, that they're not becoming invisible, that they're not disadvantaged in any way. So I think it's a sort of brave new world of flexible working, some really great things happening, but we just need to make sure that it is something that is inclusive and really, benefits workers and businesses.
And that brings me to my next question, because I wanted to ask Bettina, what are the policies that companies and governments can put in place to better integrate more women, more senior workers, and more diverse labor force?
Well, Ilaria, now is going to be the big bang moment of this podcast. First of all, I have to say, because you said that it feels like we're going from one crisis to another. I was quite struck by an image, which is actually, no, we're in a crisis cake. We're just layering the crises on top of each other. So I don't know what it does to that. I mean, we're recording this while it's tea time. So I guess my mind is playing games with me. No, so to come back. So what is revolutionary here is, well, guess what? I mean, I have been astounded at how many governments around the world think they can afford not to focus on having productive older workers and productive women in their labor market. There are most governments around the world who, are perfectly fine with the fact that when you look at women, they've spent thousands of whatever their currency is in educating them. And then again, they're perfectly happy with seeing them drop out of, the labor market and obviously playing an incredibly valuable role for society. And we know what that is. But still, and the same with workers. So you've invested all your life and all the workers have been productive, and now you're perfectly fine with seeing them sidelined. Bon, it seems that in the current situation, finally, governments are realizing that there is a pool there, and something can be done. So we are seeing policies picking up. The focus here, we think, should be around the whole career guidance and the whole transitioning piece. And actually, Marion alluded that at the beginning of the podcast. So those who didn't catch it, please rewind. So a lot needs to be done there to make sure that we equip women and older workers, because those are the two cohorts we're looking at, with what they need so that they can indeed, enter the labor market. There's in our world what we call active labor market policies, which is really around, capturing that workforce and providing the support. And by the way, I here also want to make it clear that support can, of course, be brought by public employment services, but very much so as well by private employment services, who on a daily basis are waking up in the morning, not the services, but the people who work. And there's millions of people who are in that industry who get the greatest pleasure out of doing exactly that, right? Out of integrating women either into the labor market directly or back into the labor market, and the same with older people. So to me, this is actually an area where recruiters play an absolutely key role these days. This all plays into teams needing to be diverse as well. So we have a whole narrative, and in many countries and companies there's a mindset around it as well, but it's the how to do it, right? So you've asked me about what companies and governments are doing. So again, governments focus on activation policies, focus on career guidance and transitioning, and companies focus on recruiting broadly and diversely. And then, of course, on whatever programs and framework conditions that you can give to make sure that you attract women and older workers. And there are things happening there, I must say. It's starting to move, but still not at the scale that companies need and actually that the economy needs.
We have covered so many issues in the last half an hour: inflation, mental well-being, the risk of the social tensions, the recession. But I want to ask one more thing before I let you go, because we didn't talk about the younger generation. And what I would like to ask you too is a prediction on the Gen Z or Gen Z. How will they change the way we work, or will they lead in a different way? Marion, do you want to go first?
It's such a big question, Lara. It's really not fair. I think it's a great question. And I think, in a way, we still need to be very open because, there are surveys now coming out about who are this new generation who were born between 95 and 2010. They have some similarities with millennials, but they have some important differences. And I think some of those important differences, the fact that they are so inclusive and they are very sort of liberal minded and very tolerant, I think that has some really great things, implications for corporate culture. They do have a very set of strong values, and they will act on those values. And so we've seen again that increase of companies realizing that they have to be very authentic and sincere and genuine about their purpose and having a larger purpose and taking very seriously their responsibilities, their environmental responsibilities, which is all great, absolutely fantastic. But I think as well that they're a generation that have come to age through very difficult times, and so therefore I do think we need to really help them to be resilient, to be adaptable, and I think that something that's also come out in the surveys is that they do value stability. They actually value secure employment, so that they will have some different attitudes. I think it's all good, but I think the thing that gets me particularly excited is that when it comes to being consumers, the fact that they do have these principles, but also they have a different understanding of ownership. That they have this difference about being willing to use things and share things and and not necessarily own something. And that could give way, I think, that could just, and it is already ushering in all sorts of new ways of products and services that can be environmentally, better. And I think that's quite exciting.
I love it. Bettina, what is your prediction?
Prediction. Well, first of all, I think we should extend this podcast by 30 minutes. That's my number one. And not just because of that topic, but I'm really enjoying it. So, no, look, Gen Z, it's going to be huge. I mean, huge impact. You asked, will they lead in a different way? Absolutely. And thankfully so, right? So I subscribe to everything that Marion said. I just want to really underline that to me, a big game changer is, of course, their approach and their usage of technology, right? And that will also, and that's where I wish I had the crystal ball. But to me, this is part of the conversation around the metaverse as well, and how we will be working in future. I can disclose here that my avatar has a pink Iroquois haircut and is full of tattoos. But I guess that is only, scraping the tip of the iceberg of what will come from Generation Z. I think what the thought I'd love to leave you with, and it will have to be close to the end, I think, is that it's not only by Generation Z, is it? I mean, if we look at the workplace and the labor market today, it's about having 4 generations at work. We've never had that before in the history of work, if I can say so. And indeed, because there's different ways of leading and managing teams, you can have the youngster who is your boss. And you will have people of all ages and backgrounds in your teams, and hopefully so. Now, again, we choose and we must see this as a positive. I really want to underline that. But clearly, this will change the equation completely. And how big that shift is will depend on the culture that you already have, on the way you communicate, and how ready you are to embrace the changes.
So with that, our time is up for today. Thank you, Bettina, thank you, Marion, and thank you all for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to explore the entire catalog of podcasts from the Conference Board by visiting our website, tcb.org/podcast. I'm Ilaria Maselli, your host for today, and this is my last podcast with the Conference Board. It's been an honor and a lot of fun to sit here in the Brussels studio together with my colleagues. Derek, Margaret, and MJ, thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon elsewhere.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.